it's Olive. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. A little bit of a different one today. I'm a little bit more dressed up. I wanted to sit down and talk you guys through how I discovered that my horse had kissing spines, sort of how we went about diagnosing that, and I guess what his symptoms were. In my mind, he didn't show stereotypical kissing spines symptoms, I guess. It definitely made it a lot harder to then diagnose that, and it made it a lot harder for me to listen to him and figure out what he was actually trying to tell me. So if this video helps anybody today think about what their horse could be telling them, then that's my goal. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a vet. I'm not telling you that if your horse does these things that my horse did, that it's gonna be kissing spines. I'm in no way trying to diagnose anybody's horses at all. You know, take everything that I say with a bit of a grain of salt. Some of the things that I might say might have actually not been related, but it's something that I noticed that led me to diagnosing him with kissing spines. So let's get started. So we'll start with when I bought him. So I bought him at the end of January 2024. So I've had him about a year and a half now, I think just over a year and a half. So when I got him, he was 12, and I had been told that he was retired off the track for 4 years, so he wasn't off the track thoroughbred. And so he was overweight, he was in paddock condition, he hadn't really done much since coming off the track. He just sort of, he was their muck around pony. They just would throw their kids on him and, you know, bash around the paddock. So he hadn't really done any sort of formal riding. It was just, you know, jump on him and have fun, which was fine. I felt that I had enough time at the time to take on a horse that would probably require a little bit more effort to bring them back. You know, I wasn't jumping in with the intention to take him out competing immediately. I had very low expectations with the horse because obviously I didn't have a massive budget. I knew what I was in for in looking in that sort of range. So yeah, he was really overweight. It was in the middle of summer too, so he was quite slow and lethargic, and I was like, oh, okay, so I get that this is probably a bit of he's a bit warm, it's a bit hard for him at the moment, we'll just, you know, low expectations. So I rode him and I could tell that he was unbalanced, and I was like, yep, okay, cool, so this is probably just everything to do with the fact that he has been out of work for 4 years. So we went through with it. I had a PPE done. He was a little bit lame on one hoof, but those vets just suggested that I shoe him for a round. He just had a crack in his hoof that was starting to, you know, flex a little bit, and that was causing him a bit of pain. So that resolved itself. That was nothing to do with it. But otherwise he was completely fine. They were like, yep, look, he's never going to do anything spectacular, but if you're just looking to do some really low level stuff, just some trail rides, a bit of fun, then yeah, go for it. Which was all I wanted to do because, you know, I work full time. I didn't have the time, I didn't have the resources to take on like a competition horse. That's not obviously what I was looking for. So when he came home, it probably took me about a month to actually start riding him. I think around my birthday, which was like the middle of March, so like the entirety of February, I wasn't riding him. You know, it was a little bit looking for a saddle. So I had bought a saddle. I do not recommend this. I will never do this again, but I bought the saddle that I thought that I liked and that fit me, but I wasn't certain if it was going to fit him. I shaped a bit of wire to his back, roughly where the saddle would sit in behind his shoulders, and I took that into the shop that I bought my saddle from, and they had a saddle fitter on site, and so she looked at it, and the saddle that I wanted, which was the Arena dressage saddle, I love that saddle, I love it, it's so comfortable, but they only had the wide version, so that's where the gullet size, like the smallest it goes, is wide, and it's only adjustable up from there. That was the only one that they had in stock, and where he was with his weight at the time, the wide gullet fit him. So I bought it. I then had another fitter to come out and adjust it fully, and she was like, yeah, cool, I'm happy with that, awesome. So then I started to ride, and that was about a month after I had bought him. Where he was at the time, on my parents' farm, I could really only see him on weekends. So Like I wasn't out there enough. I wasn't riding consistently. I wasn't working him consistently, but you know, nothing that I was doing was really hard work. And, you know, behaviorally, he started to sort of fall off a little bit. So I brought him back to town and, you know, adjusted him a half an hour away from home where I lived in the city. This was a lot better. I was able to build a bit more of a relationship with him. I was able to ride him a bit more. I was able to work on our groundwork, and I was really happy with how he was doing. So I think I moved him maybe late April, early May. It was sort of coming into winter. We were starting to look at rugs. The weather was starting to get a bit colder. I was still, you know, riding reasonably consistently. I think I was trying to ride at least once a week when I was doing this. I think there were a couple of things that contributed to the loss of condition that he had over winter last year. You know, I didn't really know what I was doing. I thought, great, I'll use winter to help him lose a bit of the weight. So I was still rugging him. You know, he would go out during the day and then he would come into a stable overnight because he was in with another couple of horses, and that was just how this adjustment ran it. You know, he had 2 other horses that he was out with during the day, and then so that there were no fights over feed, everyone was brought into a separate stable and then they were kept in there overnight. It was DIY, so I was going out there every day, making sure that he was all right and watching him and whatnot. But I guess due to my lack of knowledge at the time, I wasn't watching him as well as I probably should have been. I'm not exactly certain how or why. Like, you know, he was being rugged. It never got that cold. Like it very, very rarely got under 10 degrees. So it was, you know, he was in a cotton and a fleece, which I deemed to be adequate because he was in a stable as well. Like, it's not like he was outside. So he was rugged, he was fed and whatnot. He was fed twice a day, morning and night. So it's not like I wasn't feeding this horse, but he did drop a lot of condition. He was being chased around the paddock. He wasn't the top of the paddock, so he was a little bit bullied. He was constantly covered in scratches and bites, and just, you know, every time I would go out there in the middle of the day, he would be chased around the paddock. It wasn't ideal, but at the time I couldn't really move him anywhere else. Where he was really cheap and it was convenient, and the rest of the facilities were good, that I was like, no, it's okay. I'm out here every day. I'm able to treat any injuries that he has. You know, the other horse owners were aware that this was happening, so they were sort of starting to try and help. We were using a bunch of different things. I won't get too into that. Anyway, but I was still riding at the time, right? I wasn't watching the saddle fit. And I think this was part of the problem. I don't think, you know, my weight wasn't the main contributor. The saddle fit wasn't the main contributor. What he was being fed wasn't the main contributor. What he was being rugged wasn't the main contributor. I think the main contributor was just that he was predisposed to kissing spines. But I think all of the factors, me not knowing what I was looking for, him potentially not being fed enough to hold enough of the weight, him potentially not being rugged enough to hold enough of the weight, and the incorrect saddle fit that I later found out, I think definitely contributed to how bad the issue got. So obviously through winter I was still riding, and because he had lost quite a bit of the weight, I was like, cool, okay, great, I'll, you know, start to up his feed a little bit more again because I don't want him to lose too much. But because it was winter, I was still spending a lot of time lunging and doing pole work even when I was riding. So a lot of the pole work that we would do would be on the ground. I was only really riding with my instructor, so I would have a lesson once a week. I would just walk in next door just because it was hard, because I was working full time. I would have to ride in the dark. So it was sort of difficult to do anything because it was like 6 o'clock at night while I was out there, and then I still had to pack up everything, feed him, and then get home at a reasonable time to then obviously go to work the next morning. At the time I was starting work at 6 a.m. So it was, yeah, it was a lot. Probably didn't have as much time as I thought I actually did, but you know, I was doing a lot more groundwork than I was actually riding him. When I was riding him, it sort of got to, I guess, a stage where he just wasn't happy. I guess when I was riding him, as it sort of got to winter and I moved him to the new adjustment, you know, I sort of put it down to, he's not normally like they didn't have a sand arena where he had come from. So I was like, okay, well, I guess it makes a bit of sense that he's not too happy to stay in the walk, and he was a bit jig-joggy, and that sort of stereotypical of, you know, the off the track thoroughbred. They get a little bit excited easily. They're sort of hard to keep at an even level. I just put it down to he's been out of work, he doesn't want to do this, you know, he's unfit, it's a little bit hard for him. But a lot of what he would do, like he was perfectly fine for me to get on, he was perfectly fine for me to tack up, he wasn't girthy at all, there was never any flinching over the back, there was nothing that I guess would have thrown up too many warning signs. You know, he would throw his head quite a bit when we would walk around. Like I never had too much contact because of this. We were more focusing on, you know, tempo and rhythm and the way that he was sort of just walking forwards rather than anything else. Yeah, it sort of got to a point where I was like, okay, well, maybe the bit's wrong. Maybe there's something happening. So I had his teeth done. His teeth were fine. You know, that wasn't the problem. It's not like I was hanging on his face for him to be throwing his head. I wasn't asking him to do anything crazy, but he would only do it obviously when he was under saddle. So I sort of looked at the saddle fit, but I didn't really, it didn't twig at the time. It still looked all right, but like he hadn't fully lost weight by the time that this head throwing business started, but it was as I was starting to ride him a little bit more. There were constantly distractions, you know. I figured he was just a bit of a fidget butt, which he has always been. So yeah, I had a bit fitter out. I got a new bit for him, which he did go a lot better in. He, you know, the head shaking sort of stopped a little bit for a little while. Anyway, you know, I kept riding him, we kept lunging, I was lunging with the bit in, blah, blah, blah. We'll pause for a second here. I'll recap some of the main things that I noticed when we were under saddle. So stereotypically with kissing spines, when, you know, you tell somebody, oh, I think my horse has kissing spines, they immediately sort of think of, you know, the horse bucking, the horse trying to throw you off all the time, generally being unhappy with the saddle on their back, being unhappy with being touched along the back, you know, they're not happy, whereas he didn't really have any of this. Most of his issues that I noticed were a lack of top line, which I put down to the fact that he had been out of work for 4 years. The head throwing, which I again put down to he's not really been in this environment being ridden. It's, you know, it's all a little bit new. He's a bit distracted, didn't want to just walk. The inconsistent pace, so his inability to just walk for an extended period of time. It was a walk and then he would try and break off into a trot, but then when we were in the trot, it was just, he was always trying to go faster. So I went, okay, well that's just, you know, that's an ex-racehorse thing. He had very poor balance, so I again put this down to just he's not strong. He would run around on the lunge with his head turned to the outside. You know, it's hard to run in a circle. So I was like, okay, well he's got some imbalances in his body. He's just not strong enough. He just doesn't have the muscles built up. So I sort of just was like, okay, well, we'll focus on that. We'll build the strength and it'll be fine. Obviously everything wasn't fine. The last time that I rode him properly, I think I was riding him in the afternoon on like a Sunday by myself, and I was in the arena and we were just sort of working on the stuff that I had been working on in my lesson the day prior. We were doing some tight turns, some circles, some, you know, some transitions, and he just all of a sudden refused to walk forwards. Like, I think I was trying to cool down and just for whatever reason, well, I know the reason now, but at the time I was really confused. He just blatantly stopped, and when I would ask him to walk forwards, he would just throw his head. And I would ask and he would throw his head. You know, it's not like I had any contact on the reins. I had the reins as loose as I could to try and coax him to walk forwards, and he just blatantly refused. So that sort of started to throw a bit of warning signs. I had sort of started to wonder whether or not there was an underlying problem past just his, you know, inexperience, his lack of muscle, everything else. But I didn't think it was kissing spines. Anyway, so we ended that there, and then the next day I had somebody come out with me to film it. And so I got him all ready. He was completely fine, you know, more than happy to stand at the mounting block. I jumped on. He was more than happy for me to get on at the mounting block. He didn't care about the saddle being on his back. He was completely fine. But I got on his back, he stood completely still, which I had been, you know, struggling with. He had been getting a lot better, but this day he stood completely still as I got on. I was able to muck around with the stirrups, I mucked around with the girth, and then I asked him to walk forwards and he threw his head. He pins his ears and throws his head up and down. Every time I would ask, you can see me ask a little bit harder. I'm like, come on, like, you know, I need you to walk forwards. We're not just sitting here doing nothing. Like, I'm here to ride. And yeah, so I was basically told to F off. So rather than piss him off, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and I jumped off and tried to check out what was going on. So I was like, okay, well, he did this yesterday at the end of our ride. It's weird that he was doing it at the start of the ride. So then I checked all the gear and made sure that I didn't have, you know, there was nothing rubbing, there was nothing pinching, the girth wasn't sitting in the wrong spot, the saddle wasn't sitting in the wrong spot, and that sort of, you know, I was like, okay, well, there's something up, he's upset about something. Yeah, so I left it for a little while, we packed up, I put him back out in the paddock that day, and I ended up getting a chiropractor out for him, and this chiropractor sort of just took one look and started to palpate along his back, and as we got to just behind his shoulders where the saddle would sit, he reacted the same way. He threw his head up. So immediately I sort of knew, okay, well, his back is sore. Before the chiro even said anything, I was like, okay, yeah, his back is sore. So this chiro didn't really do any adjustments. He just sort of checked him out generally and we sort of put it down to, yeah, okay, there's something up with his back. So I went and grabbed my saddle for the chiro and we threw it on and he told me what I had been neglecting to pay attention to, which was the saddle fit. So obviously he had lost a lot of weight, and as I had said, that the wide gullet was as small as his saddle went, and that fit him at his largest, just. So obviously it didn't fit him anymore, and there was nothing I could do about it. So I sort of was like, okay, well, it doesn't fit. It's, you know, he's not happy at all, so I'll ditch it. I wanted to wait until his back was back to a point where I could, you know, press along it and poke and prod, and there was no reaction. In the time waiting for that, I was still lunging. He wouldn't canter on the lunge, which I sort of was like, okay, well, again, maybe he's just a bit weak. Obviously, I could visibly see that he was severely lacking top line. I again put this down to the condition that he had lost over the winter and I guess the poor saddle fit. Anyway, so a couple months had passed. We had been doing only groundwork. I had decided, no, we're not doing anything like saddle related anymore. I did have a saddle fitter out before I discovered that he had kissing spines, but after I decided I was going to stop riding him, just to sort of see. So I had this fitter out and I was like, okay, how bad is the saddle fit? And he told me, look, it's not great. Obviously I can't make it any smaller. I would like to, the next gullet size down and probably fit him, but obviously we can't put that in this arena saddle. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool, great. Is there anything else that I need to look out for in the saddle? And he goes, your horse has a very short back, which I knew I could see. But the 18-inch dressage saddle, the way that this saddle was formed was too long for his back. It wasn't extremely too long, but it was like, you know, half an inch too long, which makes a massive difference when it's then no longer sitting on a part of their spine that is supported, that, you know, is meant to support us when we're riding. Yeah, I had basically just been told that the saddle that I had was no longer gonna fit. So now I've been trying to sell it. It is still for sale if anybody is interested. But yeah, so I, at that time then decided, okay, nah, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to attempt to use that saddle anymore. I'm just gonna sell it. Like, it was really sad because I loved that saddle. It was so comfortable. But yeah, it didn't fit him. There was nothing that I could do to change that. So rather than keep it for no reason, I listed it for sale. Anyway, so a couple more months passed and I had this chiro back out again because I was like, okay, well, he no longer palpates sore along his back where the saddle fits. We're starting to build a little bit of top line, but he still was very weak and he was a little bit lame. He just was off. So he was off in the back end, and I ended up getting, you know, it wasn't feet related, it wasn't really anything else. It was only like, it was sort of just off. I don't know. He just, when you get to know a horse, you sort of know, or an animal or anybody, you know when they're just having a bit of an off day, you know when something's abnormal for them. So he was just the way that he was acting was abnormal. So I had this chiropractor back out, and he came out and he sort of lunged him in the paddock and had a look at him, and he was like, yeah, okay, so he's, you know, he's body lame. There's something else going on here. And that's when he said to me, have you thought about kissing spines? Have you had a vet out? Have you investigated that at all? And prior to that, I hadn't, because I didn't want it to be kissing spines. Nothing that he was displaying, it wasn't stereotypical for kissing spines. So I sort of just, I didn't want it to be. I didn't want to convince myself it was. I wanted to see if I could find another solution before I sort of went down the kissing spines route. But after he said that to me, and he was like, yeah, I would be highly, highly surprised if it wasn't, I started to investigate getting him x-rayed and diagnosing him with kissing spines. So I was calling vets in the area. I was trying to see who could come out or whatever. I ended up having to take him an hour away to the vets, and they did the x-ray for me on the spot. So I took a day off work, we took him out there. He was actually really good. I didn't even have to sedate him for these x-rays. So the x-rays pretty much confirmed on the spot. Like, even I could see at the time that there was a problem as we were going through. So the vets then immediately started talking about surgery, and that freaked me out. I was like, okay, well, I don't know if I can afford to do that. So I just was like, okay, thanks, awesome. I'll have to have a think about what we want to do, because obviously that's not the only option. There's lots of different options to deal with a horse with kissing spines, and his wasn't super severe. That was 3 points in his back, right where the saddle, like the back of my saddle would sit, that was causing part of the problem. So that's what I mean by, I don't think it was the saddle fit. Could have affected this a little bit more and caused him more pain, which was probably why then he started to act out a little bit more, because I was riding a little bit more towards the end, and you know, he had dropped all of his top line, blah 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 blah. I will say, dropping top line is a stereotypical kissing spines symptom, but again, it links up with everything else, which is why at the time I didn't think that would have been part of that, because horses will drop top line for any reason, you know. Losing condition over winter, you know, losing weight. Anyway, my whole world came crumbling down when I saw those x-rays, and it had basically been confirmed that yes, he did have kissing spines.